Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. Today we're continuing our series on developing the Copilot cognitive function for each of the Myers-Briggs personality types. This is the fourth in the series. If you are just jumping on, this is your first podcast, we recommend that you maybe go back and listen to the beginning podcasts in this series and even check out the podcast on the car model. You'll get a little bit of history and a little bit of context for what we're talking about. Effectively, we are diving into the cognitive functions which make up the backbone of each of the 16 Myers-Briggs personality types. And the development of these cognitive functions is pretty important in order to be at your best for each of these types. Now, if you have listened to those podcasts and you understand what we mean by the car model, you know that the driver or the dominant cognitive function for each of the Myers-Briggs types it's your go-to tool in your toolbox. It's the fun place. It's interesting. It's how you define yourself. But we have a tendency to resist development of the Copilot process because it lives in the opposite attitude of the driver process, which the attitude means if you are introverted, your driver process is introverted, and by definition, your Copilot is extroverted. It has an extroverted attitude, which is the world that you're not as familiar with, or it's not as comfortable to you. And the opposite is also true. If your driver is an extroverted cognitive function, then your Copilot is going to be an introverted cognitive function. And so since it occupies the opposite attitude or a different world, we have a tendency to sort of marginalize it. And we don't go to it as naturally because it's not as comforting, fun, interesting. It's not as much of how we define ourselves. So development of the Copilot function is very high leverage since most of us tend to avoid fleshing it out. And so since we get a lot of questions about, well, how do I develop it then if it's so important for type development? What do I do for my personal function? So what we're going to talk about today in this particular episode of the series is we're going to talk about developing the feeling functions. The two feeling functions, the first one is extroverted feeling, what we call harmony, and this would be the Copilot function for all IFJs, ISFJs, and INFJs in the Myers-Briggs system. And the second feeling function we'll tackle is introverted feeling, or what we call authenticity, which is the Copilot cognitive function for EFPs, ESFPs, and ENFPs in the system.
So one thing to remember here, we've been mentioning this in every podcast in this series, if you are an IFJ or an EFP, you are going to be leading with a cognitive function that is a perceiving process. It's a perceiving function, meaning it's the way you take information in through the world. Like you moving through the world, you're either taking it through your senses and more than just your five senses, your sense of time, balance, things of this nature. And also, if you're an intuitive, if you have an intuitive process here, you're taking in advanced pattern recognition. You're capturing information and running it through your imagination and speculating on what-if scenarios, the deeper meaning behind things. You're watching your mind bubble up and form thoughts maybe out of your imagination. So because you're entering the world from a perceiving frame, you probably have a lot of openness to the world. And I bet you that, if you compared yourself to somebody that was maybe leading with a judging function entering the world, you probably aren't as decisive in your life as much as other people. You look around and maybe you don't make decisions as quickly, or decisions take a little bit longer. Sometimes maybe even you second guess your decisions sometimes or often because you love entering the world perceiving first. You love just taking in the information, whatever is whatever speculation you have is the speculation you have, and making decisions on it isn't as pleasurable for you as you move through your life. So just making sure that you understand that what we're talking about at the Copilot position, that feeling process is going to be your decision-making process. That's your judging process. This is how you decide what you're going to do. These are the should statements of your life. So if you're developing extroverted feeling, in the case of IFJs, you're going to be doing that by taking into all the things that extroverted feeling looks at to make decisions. If you are an EFP, you're going to take into account all of the introverted feeling parts of decisions. So just keep that as kind of a marker of what's happening. Let's go ahead and talk about the IFJs first. We'll talk about developing that Copilot of extroverted feeling or harmony, and then we'll move into the EFPs.
Just one thing to remember about our Copilot is that we have a tendency to let it become a one-trick pony, meaning that we pull on it in times of like problem solving, and we pull on it in times when it's fun to use it, but we don't flesh it out as much as it could be. And so when we're talking about development of the Copilot, the goal here isn't to just figure out a strategy to use it and incorporate it in like maybe one style and just ride that pony to the end. It's more of an exploration of the entirety of the function. It's figuring out all the different things that it can do for you, all the gifts it has to give, and then developing all of these different aspects of it, as uncomfortable as that can be. Now, one of the reasons why it is uncomfortable for IFJs to develop the Copilot of extroverted feeling or harmony is that it puts them in a position that can feel uncomfortably vulnerable. When you lead with an introverted perceiving function, like introverted sensing or memory, or introverted intuition perspectives, which you're going to lead with if you're an ISFJ or an INFJ, you post-process the world to understand it, meaning that you capture information and it kind of gets stuck inside you. And you're not really doing a lot of conscientious filtering until later when you post-process it and then you figure out what it meant to you. What is the meaning of this information? What does it mean to you as an individual? How's it formed or forged your identity? And so because you have a tendency to not really vet the information you're pulling in naturally with those functions, introverted sensing or introverted intuition, and instead they get trapped for later review, IJs have a tendency to fear what gets trapped inside of them. And so they put up a bunch of walls and put up a bunch of firewalls to make sure that icky stuff doesn't get trapped inside. And even those firewalls backfire quite a few times. Like still icky stuff gets caught inside. Now you got to do something with it, right? You got to figure it out. And so one of the challenges of developing extroverted feeling or harmony is that's what it's trying to get you to do. It's trying to get you out there and connecting with other people, connecting with other people's energy, engaging, interacting, having like situations with other humans that are fickle that might turn out not so well. And now you got to figure all this out in post-processing. So there are reasons why IFJs, understandable reasons why INFJs and ISFJs will put this process off, put developing this function off and kick that can down the road because they might not feel ready for it. They might feel like what it represents to them is more pain than it's worth.
So extroverted feeling, we've nicknamed it harmony, and that's a great word for it because it really is interested in having a harmonious experience in the world. Extroverted feeling is really tapped into the social dynamics and connection points between humans. In fact, you could say that extroverted feeling is very much tied to the interrelationship between humans. Even more so, it's also interested in the human experience, the individual human's experience, but it's very much interested in the relation between humans, the connection points, and keeping a harmonious connection going at all times, removing discord and making sure that that harmony is maintained. So things that really are important to extroverted feeling are things like connection, right? Being connected to other people in real time, shared experiences, feeling like there is a sense of camaraderie, and we're all in this together. And it's almost like if the group feels good about something, the individual that's using extroverted feeling also feels good about something, because it is a pleasure to see people getting along, feeling connected, having a good experience, and also it's interested in meeting the needs of people around it. In order to have a harmonious time, in order for other people to have great connection points between each other, their needs need to be met. And when needs are met, harmony feels amazing about that. That process inside of you as an IFJ feels really good to see the people around you having their needs met, feeling connected, having a joyous and wonderful time.
Yeah, think of the extroverted functions as real-time kinetic and the introverted functions as a post-processing function. And so since extroverted feeling is real-time kinetic, then what it really taps into is the real-time emotional experience or temperature of a room. And that's why those things that you mentioned, Joel, are so important to it, because it's feeling it when somebody is not doing well. If somebody else's emotional experience is negative or uncomfortable or upsetting, depending upon the closeness that the person using Harmony has to them on a personal level, some IFJs can feel that, or some Harmony users in general can feel like deep wounding emotions from a person who might be a complete and total stranger. And other Harmony users only feel that experience when they're around loved ones. But regardless, whoever's emotions you are tapped into, those people's emotions are pretty important to you, because you'll all of a sudden just get sort of hit with a wave of emotion that isn't yours. And you were feeling fine. Everything was going bright in your day. And then all of a sudden, like, you're like, oh, I don't feel so good. What's going on? Like, I'm really upset or depressed or anxious. And then you look up and sure enough, here's the other, this is actually not your emotion. This is somebody else's emotion. And you just happen to absorb it. And so people feeling good, having good morale, like staying in communication and connection with each other is the way to create a network of positive emotions, because all of us need those positive emotions. And all of us overvalue our own experience to some extent, and that includes Harmony users. If they're going to feel uncomfortable based on somebody else's emotional experience, the assumption is everybody else is doing this too. Everybody else is sort of passing these emotions back and forth. And even for those of us that might not be as tapped into the emotional experience of other people, Harmony users are not wrong. There is going to be an energetic interchange between all human beings, and we're going to impact each other emotionally, whether it's very obvious to us and we acknowledge what's going on, or whether it's a very subterranean process. And so you could see why this becomes a judging function, as in, we need to take action on this. We need to do something about this. If somebody is not doing well, we need to get in there and we need to make them feel better. Or we need to, if we see somebody that has a need going unmet, we need to go get that need met. And so it becomes a judging function or decision-making function, because it informs how the IFJ or all Harmony users are going to be taking their action. What's going to be important to them? How are they going to prioritize their lives? And in this case with Harmony, it's to get from a place of conflict to a place of harmony, to get from a place of people not feeling good to a place where they do feel good, that they can have a positive emotional interchange, just between either two people or as entire cultures interchanging emotions.
That idea of moving from conflict to harmony is really powerful. And I believe the maturity of extroverted feeling or harmony for you as an IFJ is going to be moving from the synthetic, let's just cover over any conflict, and let's synthetically create harmony through niceties and pleasantries, to creating actual strategies to the people in your life and yourself, actually getting through the conflict to the other side to create true harmony. So it's going to be the work for you with Harmony as your co-pilot, again, to go from more the superficial level of let's just cover over. It's almost like water damage on maybe a plaster wall, not just covering over that, painting over it, but actually getting into the rotting wood or the rotting behind it, digging that out, which can be really kind of icky at times, and then repairing it correctly or fixing it correctly. That's just the first metaphor that came to my head. But basically the idea is that you want to move from superficial conflict resolution to true, authentic, deeper conflict resolution. And what's great is the Harmony process is equipped to do this. There's a lot of things the Harmony process brings to the table that are fully equipped to deal with this. And the reason why true conflict resolution is important is through conflict, that's how we humans create intimacy. So if you are a Harmony user, especially if it's your secondary position, your co-pilot position, and you crave deep intimacy in your life with other people, the way to create that deep intimacy and helping other people create deep intimacy between themselves, let's say you have a spouse and a child that are having some conflict, you could cover that over. But in helping them work through that conflict, showing up with your superpower of extroverted feeling or harmony and helping them work through that and get to an actual resolution that's a true resolution, you're creating deeper levels of intimacy. You're helping facilitate that, which is really the end goal of what you want. You want deep levels of intimacy, deep levels of connection, deep levels of harmony. And that's really the goal, kind of as a vision in your mind of where we're headed. Some of the things we're going to recommend here might go, wow, it sounds like you're talking about creating more discord in my life. What we're actually talking about is pivoting from a surface level of harmony to that deep, authentic harmony that you actually crave, I believe, at the core of your being.
Yeah, well, we touched on this in the 2 previous podcasts that one of the strategies we'll do is we will create a synthetic version of something in order for us to feel like we've really moved the needle on development. And what actual development of our Copilot processes do, regardless of what that cognitive function is it forces us to take the way out is through mentality and get to the other side, not resting in on a synthetic version, but actually having an authentic version of our desire. So true harmony requires conflict because we are all very unique individuals and we don't perfectly communicate our thoughts, our desires, our beliefs, like why we're, our motivations, why we're doing what we're doing. And so because we can't perfectly do that, conflict is inevitable. When you learn to move through conflict and actually resolve it, then that's authentic harmony. But this nicey nice, let's keep it shallow, let's just never bring anything up, that is not authentic harmony. That's being nice. That's a social nicety. So what the harmony process requires of IFJs when they're developing this is to be willing to go through something that will make them feel quite vulnerable. It's going to require more honesty and more truth. It's going to require articulating preferences and boundaries. It's going to require the IFJ to put themselves out there. It'll feel like they're putting their, exposing their neck, putting their neck on the line. And in that way, it's going to feel awful initially. But as with all of the extroverted functions that introverts must develop, the process gets faster over time. You build a thicker skin. You recognize that, articulating your preference didn't create the mushroom cloud you thought it was going to. Not everybody got mad at you, or maybe they did get mad at you because it's the first time you've really articulated it. But then somehow you made it through and you came out the other side, and you might be a little tired from the experience, but you stood up for yourself. And this is where self-esteem comes into play for IFJs, knowing they can take care of themselves and that they don't have to be protected, but they're actually prepared to enter the world on their own. Sometimes, and this happens with all of us, sometimes we find solace in our 10-year-old function. And with IFJs, that 10-year-old function is introverted thinking, or what we call accuracy. And that is a tendency for IFJs to judge others first and then let them know what they should be doing, right? Like all the things they're doing wrong in society or in a marriage or, with their family or, whatever the relationships are, to judge the individuals first and then try to quote unquote create harmony by letting them know all the things they're doing wrong or just keeping the judgment inside your heart as an IFJ. And the reason why you do that is because that feels less vulnerable. It feels like you've put up a wall now. And if you're judging first, using accuracy to pick apart somebody's beliefs or ideas or how they're going about things or their political persuasions or whatever it is, if you can pick them apart first, then when you go engage with them, you've now got armor on, right? Like you've got this shield of introverted thinking or accuracy. You've got a shield of a thinking cold place. But as with all development of copilots, we have to shift the dynamic away from the copilot serving the 10-year-old to the 10-year-old serving the copilot. So instead of coming from a judgmental frame of people are thinking wrong thoughts and they have the wrong political affiliation or they're not being socially conscious enough or whatever the situation is you first reach out to the individual to connect. And then you use truth to be part of the reconciliation process. So accuracy then is not about why they're wrong. It's about you showing up with your perceptions of truth, what you believe is the accurate perspective, and then to use it to sort of disseminate all of the things in the conversation that are causing conflict that don't need to be causing conflict. Like maybe you're actually agreeing on things and being willing to see how you agree with somebody else, and then being, somebody you don't like, and then being willing to see how you disagree with somebody you do like. And then in that way, you can do this dance of conflict resolution so much better. So it feels like it's bringing discord, but actually it's creating that authentic harmony at the end of it. And in this way, when INFJs and ISFJs really spend time developing this function, they become incredibly persuasive. They're very attractive to other people. It's a matter not just of feeling judged by them, but actually feeling like they might understand you. And so you want to go talk to them and get their wisdom and feel that lack of judgment and share ideas. And the mind opens to new thoughts because this person is so persuasive and attractive.
Yeah, there's that saying, I don't know who said it. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I think that's a great phrase for you as an IFJ. And not that you don't care. In fact, that's why you have this defense mechanism, is because you care greatly. Your extroverted feeling or harmony process cares to a very high degree. And so as, again, like Antonia said, as a protection mechanism, sometimes you put up walls or really impenetrable barriers using the data of your 10-year-old, that introverted thinking accuracy process, or all the facts to show why something's wrong. And what Antonia is positing that you do is you lead first by connection, and then you bring truth after connection. You don't lead with truth and what the opinion and the truth of the matter, quote unquote, these are the facts, and then you try to create connection afterward. You lead with connection first, empathy first, and then you bring the truth in as seasoning to that. Because quite frankly, your 10-year-old process of introverted thinking accuracy has a lot of insight. It actually has a lot of good data in there. It's not a primary way you go through the world. It's not as developed as maybe a TP in the Myers-Briggs system, but you've got a lot of good insight there. And there's valuable things that process brings to the table only after that empathy and connection is formed first. And so that's going to be the challenge for you, is this push-pull relationship with the boundaries you have of, I have a very strong barrier up because I want to protect myself because I can have that be encroached upon. Finding good strategies to, instead of have a barrier, have more of a fence with maybe fences and doors you open to allow people to come in at certain points, but you can ask them to leave and have your boundaries set clearly. And inside that, you can bring the truth to the situation, which actually is very beneficial. This is a superpower of yours to be able to create those boundaries, a safe space of harmony and connection to then have actual truths come up. And that's really the vision for you as an IFJ, again, bringing your amazing superpowers to the world, which is through that harmony process.
Yeah, I want to just reiterate what you just said and remind people that each of these functions does a lot. There's many different gifts it gives. And one of the gifts that this process or function brings is the ability to create very healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries is a beautiful gift that harmony gives to IFJs, especially if they're concerned about being too vulnerable. And as you mentioned, there are different kind of boundaries we set up. We can set up huge brick walls so we're impenetrable. We can set up gates, like you mentioned, and fences. And, maybe I always kind of envision the healthiest boundaries being a gate that you can communicate with people on each side of the gate or on the fence. And when you engage on this fence with this, back and forth, and then you go, yeah, this person's an okay person, then you pop open the gate and let them in. And in this kind of scenario, you don't have a sense of impenetrability. What you have is a sense of understanding that you're allowed to have your own space. You're allowed to have your own sort of inner property. And the other person's also allowed to have that. But you're going to be okay with allowing some people in. And sometimes you might not get the right read. Sometimes you might be off and the person does a little bit of damage. And that's kind of that's part of being human, right? We get hurt sometimes. But you get better at reading who you can invite in through the gate and who you can't. And then over time, you're not as self-protective. The other thing that harmony gives IFJs is the ability to get people's needs met without sacrificing their own. Because harmony is about getting everybody's needs met, which includes yours. And if you perpetually give to others in order to stave off maybe some of that discord or conflict that you're fearing, and then you're running yourself ragged, and then you're bitter and resentful and exhausted and all the other negative things that come along with too much giving, That's not really you being selfless. That's actually you being selfish because you're avoiding a task you don't want to do, which is engage in any form of conflict. You'd rather just peacekeep so that you don't have to do something that's uncomfortable for you. So while it feels really selfless, it actually goes back to you not wanting to build a part of your harmony process that is important to build. So if you can simultaneously work on really good boundary setting and also conflict resolution, and also knowing when to say yes and when to say no when it comes to getting other people's needs met and being able to get, time for yourself and get your needs met. Once you can sort of balance all three of these really lovely gifts from the harmony process, then you become I love IFJs that have done this. It's like they're like superheroes to me because they have this gentleness with this penetrating observation and truth. They feel so snuggly to me as an ENTP. I just love them. And because I don't think that they're going to BS me. I think that they're going to tell me what's going on. They're going to be really honest with me and I can trust them. And so then the ability to create just very, very beautiful intimacy. Now they become qualified for it because they've built all the things that they need to build in order to have that intimacy. Well,
and again, looking at the vision of this, you as an IFJ, when you get good at creating your own boundaries, because again, this is an extroverted feeling process. You're creating situations and containers for this to happen. And you're creating boundaries in your life. There's going to be some external markers. You have schedule, you have maybe different times people can access you or request time of you. You have time maybe you set aside for yourself. You're learning how to construct this in the outer world. What's great is you get good enough to where you can help other people create boundaries to hear truths. So when someone comes and they have a challenge, you're not going to blast their personal issues in a room full of other people, right? You would figure a way to create a boundary for them to hear maybe a hard truth because you've done that for yourself to create your own boundaries. Now you can help other people be able to hear truths or be able to sit with things or be able to work through issues or whatever based on this superpower you're building, right? So that's really exciting because when you build it for yourself, again, it helps you with the harmony process of being able to now help other people create that for themselves and create containments and spaces for that to happen. So there's a lot of wealth here, and I think we could maybe get into an exercise now. Do you want to talk about exercises or is there more you want to talk about the harmony process?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Just one note, I actually think that IFJs that have a well-defined harmony, a Copilot or extroverted feeling Copilot, are actually better at identifying good truths. Like the IFJs that over-rely on their 10-year-old of introverted thinking or accuracy at the cost of truly developing their Copilot of harmony, they're not as right as often as they think they are. And oftentimes it's because they're missing a big piece of the puzzle, which is the impact these things have on humans. And so when they first check in with that piece and really use what their native wiring is already excellent at, which is checking in with how the human play sort of, plays out, then their introverted thinking or accuracy function is actually sharper. And they become smarter and they become better at identifying accurate truths. So if you want to be an IFJ that has really good truth sort of instruments, like for being able to hear the ring of truth, then it's generally in an almost counterintuitive way, the harmony process that's the key. So an exercise, extroverted feeling sometimes is difficult for IFJs, again, because it makes them feel vulnerable. And one of the things that you can do is you can get good at expressing what's going on for you and your own personal preferences. So the challenge here is that IFJs oftentimes, they go one of two directions. They either say yes to everything or they say no to everything when it comes to helping out. They say no if they don't think they can handle anything and they hide out at home, or they say yes to everything if they're avoiding conflicts by being a people pleaser. But one of the challenges with that is we don't know which one you are. So if you want to develop harmony or extroverted feeling and you either say no to everything or you say yes to everything, one of the things you can get really good at is just communicating better. Just go ahead and when any decision is being made and you're a part of that decision, get good at communicating what your personal preference is. And then being okay with everybody hearing it and not necessarily going with it right? And you might have to sacrifice your personal preference in behalf of other people. But just getting good at stating your personal preference and then being willing to have any ensuing conflicts. And then if there is conflicts, because you created a world where nobody's used to you speaking up and that's weird to them, then any conflict that comes up, then you'll be able to deal with it, especially if it's just on the level of a preference, because preferences are usually pretty small potatoes. This isn't necessarily like huge game-changing things, but for one whole week, every time you're involved in a decision that has other people, state what your preference is and let it hang there. And then see if that kicks up any conversations. Does that disrupt anything in your life? Are you able to figure out what your preferences are and other people's preferences are, and then find some sort of in between, right? Some middle ground. Get really good at lobbying these conversations back and forth and being able to not be a peacekeeper, but somebody who actually creates peace by finding ways to play in each other's sandbox.
You can expand this idea of preference. That's a great place to start with what your desires are in decisions. You can also state your preference in the interactions you're having with people. Say your child is raising their voice at you. You can say, this is crossing a boundary of mine, and I don't tolerate you raising your voice at me, and articulating your preference that they lower their voice and speak to you with respect. Things of that nature. So it's not just the decisions, but it's also the interactions you're having with people. And you, especially if it's your domain, it's your house and someone's in your house, maybe your children are fighting, and you can state your preference of the rules of engagement. Again, extroverted feeling is really good about, quote unquote, the rules of engagement, of how people are interacting, the dynamic between people. And so this is something also you could state your preference around, maybe at work. Maybe you have, and again, some of this is going to be like, geez, Joel, I can't believe you're recommending this. Like, I'm terrified to do this. But it could be an employer or a boss or even an employee or someone that reports to you, talking to you in a certain way and say, hey, I'd like to change how this dynamic is. Here's how I'd like these interactions to go. So you're stating your preference of the interaction, not just the decision that you want to make that's coming from you. And in fact, that also, it probably depending on how you're wired personally, one of those is probably going to be easier to access than the other. You'll probably have to focus on working on developing the other one of those. So you might actually already have some skill creating the framework for how people interact with you or interact around you. And you have to develop more of where do I want to go eat? What do I want to eat tonight? Because usually you just say maybe, what everybody else wants, I'll go along with. So you have to get really in touch with what it is that you want. Or maybe you really are in touch with what you want. You have no problem voicing, I want to go eat Mexican food tonight. Or whatever. That's easier for you, and maybe it's more about helping create the container of engagement for the people around you, between yourself and them or between each other in your domain that you kind of see yourself around or over, I guess. So those are just two things to expand upon, or just one more thing to expand upon, I should say, the extroverted feeling process of articulating what your preferences are.
One of the things that extroverted feeling or harmony also gives you is organizational ability. It helps you stay in tune and connected to how other people are experiencing things like time and their environment and their setting. And so some of the challenges that IFJs can have is if they're really heavily leaning towards their introverted perceiving process, they can get very disconnected to structure and organization. And even though they're judgers, right, they're Js in the Myers-Briggs system, they can actually be pretty untethered from organization in the outside world until they develop this function. So that's one more gift that extroverted feeling or harmony can give you, is a way to tether timelines and tether organization to other people's needs and realizing how they're experiencing it. And so there's just a plethora of things that developing this function can do for you. All right, are we ready to move on to EFPs?
Yeah, let's move over to the ESFPs and the ENFPs, which is my personality type. So I don't know why I said it in a weird voice, but I guess because it's me. So this is, EFPs are going to be leading either with the process of extroverted sensing. We've nicknamed that sensation. And ENFPs are going to be leading with a perceiving process of extroverted intuition, or what we've nicknamed exploration. Now, the Copilot for EFPs, for all EFPs, is going to be introverted feeling. We've nicknamed that authenticity. So for IFJs, it was extroverted feeling, that harmony process. But for EFPs, it's going to be that introverted feeling process. And you almost want to look at it like if you looked at it like a little circles with lines drawn between each other. If extroverted feeling is looking at the lines between the people, introverted feeling is looking at the people and the feelings the individual houses themselves. Not that extroverted feeling isn't concerned with what people are feeling. Obviously it is. And not that introverted feeling isn't concerned with the connection points between people. It is as well. It's just where's the leading point? Like, where are they going to start from? They're going to start from the individual, or are they going to start from the collective and the points between the individuals? So this authenticity process. Now, as an ENFP, I'm envious of all of you extroverted feeling IFJs that get to go and do something extroverted, because we're talking about an introverted judging process. Introverted feeling is about figuring out what resonates with you if you're an EFP at a core level. So what are the core values? What is your identity? What resonates with you? What feels authentic when you're making a decision in the world? And this, from my perspective, in my opinion, is one of the slowest decision-making processes, if not the slowest of all four of them in the Myers-Briggs system, for making a decision. It takes a while to know how you feel about something because there's a lot of complex feelings, emotions, and impressions you might have, and you probably have, if you use this process to make decisions, conflicting core values. And sometimes it's hard to get all of those core values in alignment and to sync up in almost a chorus of voices that is the right course of action, because you can almost find a feeling toward any possible action you could take in the world. And so it's often a challenge for you as an EFP to slow down enough and get into an introverted space to understand what is truly authentic for you as an individual, what resonates with you on a core level as the right decision or right course of action. So I just want to acknowledge that it's not so much about doing something, it's more about getting in touch with who you are at the identity level. And it's going to potentially feel frustrating at times if you're an EFP to get in touch with that process. It's going to feel slow, clumsy, frustrating sometimes. And from my experience, it could cause many months and days of tears and thrashing to get to a sense of where you really understand yourself and the decisions you're making to a degree where you can actually have it make an effect in your life.
I think we've mentioned this in previous podcasts in this series, but I think sometimes it's hard to articulate as extroverts how difficult it is to get into our introverted function. There's a lot of question marks around what is it that I actually feel about something? Like, who am I? That's one of the big ones, is when you go in, you got to kind of question, well, do I know myself that well? I thought I knew myself. I was making all these decisions, these quick decisions based on what I thought I knew about myself. And now all of a sudden I'm questioning everything and my identity. And one of the challenges to an introverted judging function in particular is that this is how you make decisions. So this is a lot of hard work. You've got to really know yourself so you can make the right call. For EPs, all of the EP types, but EFPs probably even most especially, getting into action is not a challenge. Start moving and, just test, iterate and break, move fast and break things and throw spaghetti against the wall. All of that's very easy to do. And it's because getting into action is rewarding and it makes you feel like you have freedom. One of the challenges to getting inside of yourself and trying to figure out who you really are is now you're sort of limited. You're limiting your options to what is in, alignment with your conscience and your ethics. You're actually limiting your range of motion. So it feels like you don't have the freedom you once did. But again, it's similar to all the other types when they're developing their Copilot, is that there's a synthetic version of your end game, and then there is a real version of your end game. And the real version always comes along with self-esteem and resting into oneself and rootedness and groundedness and a feeling like everything's going to be okay, like you got this. And the synthetic version of freedom, which is what EFPs want, is they want to be able to feel free in the outside world. The synthetic version is I can do literally anything I want. But that's not true, because if you do literally anything you want, some of the actions in that category of anything are very binding consequences. Like you might saddle yourself with a consequence that actually imprisons you and It makes it so that you can't do anything you want. So if you go inside of yours, including, by the way, actions that you live with now simply with guilt and shame as a result. So it doesn't have to be something like, having a kid that you didn't want to have, or getting in, spending $100,000 in college on a career you realize after college you didn't want. Like, it's not just those kinds of decisions. It's also causing other people pain, or doing things that were out of alignment with your identity, but you didn't know it when you did it. And now you have to live with that forever. And so the authentic version of freedom is actually knowing yourself well enough to always stay in alignment with your convictions. And so when you are behaving in a certain way, you actually do have true freedom, because you have an anchor point to going, I know that I'm psychologically and emotionally clean. Like, I'm not doing anything that's offending me, and I'm not making decisions that are going contrary to how I want to spend my life. So you're a little more confined in the actions you can take, but you're doing things that are in alignment with you so they feel good. And you know that you at the end of the day, which is a big question for introverted feeling or authenticity, is, am I a good person? And at the end of the day, you can rest into, I think I had more good people qualities today than bad people qualities.
So we talk about, with extroverted feeling in the first part of this podcast, around this notion of conflict, and through conflict we get intimacy. Well, with introverted feeling, we're going to talk about conflict also, but the conflict is not external. The conflict is with yourself. It's an internal conflict that you have with those different voices inside of you, and the intimacy you're trying to create is an intimacy with yourself. So when you're making decisions and you're confused about the decision to make, it's because you don't know yourself to the degree to know what the right decision is. The intimacy with yourself isn't there at the level where you can trust that intimacy and trust yourself in a lot of ways. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to go ahead and dive into the conflict that lives within inside of you, all that introverted feeling stuff that can be very conflicting, and work down through that and sit with it and meditate on it and get that into alignment to where you have intimacy with yourself. And now you trust yourself when you make decisions that those are the correct decisions to make for you. So this is kind of the trajectory we're going to go on when we talk about introverted feeling, is getting through that conflict, that internal conflict, to that core intimacy with yourself. Part of that, again, is you're going to have emotions because of the introverted feeling nature. You are the most, of all the personality types, you're the most tapped into every possible nuance of how you feel internally about everything that you're doing in the world. And sometimes those feelings you have are in direct opposition. It's not just one or two, in fact, there's multiples of these that might all be in direct opposition with each other. And you're looking to say, wow, like I could see a perspective or a feeling perspective inside of me that makes this course of action over here seem like the right course of action. And yet there's 6 others over here that conflict with that. And if I choose any one of these, I don't know if it's the right choice because it's in conflict with all the other parts of me that I can feel inside. And so often you can sit there as an EFP, either not making decisions at all, you just kind of just do whatever's coming up that day, or just push all that away and make quick decisions based on what's expedient for you. So either churn in an indecisive nature forever, you churn indecisively for a long period of time, or you say, I can't live in an indecisive frame. I'm going to have to figure a way to make much more quick decisions. I have to find a way to make expedient decisions. And this throws you into the 10-year-old process that lives inside your personality, which is extroverted thinking, Extroverted thinking, we've nicknamed effectiveness, is asking the question, what works? What gets the job done? What closes the loop? What checks the box off the to-do list? And so EFPs go one of 2 routes. Again, they either get into paralysis. They can't seem to make a decision. They never know what it is. They just try a bunch of stuff, but they're not really deciding anything firmly. Or they start deciding so rapidly using that extroverted thinking process, that effectiveness process, that they're not even checking in to see, does this resonate with me? Is this in alignment with who I am? Does this conflict with some of the other core voices inside of myself? And they just ignore the conflict and just start taking action to close loops. And here, maybe 5-10 years down the road, they're on a career path, they're in a relationship, they're doing something. You, as an EFP, might be doing something and you go, wow, this isn't me at all. This doesn't feel right in the least. And here I've built this habit of executing quickly without checking in first. So one of these is probably, if you're an extreme level, obviously you're probably listening are a little bit more balanced than those two extremes, but those are two extreme versions of how this shows up for you as an EFP.
Another gift that introverted feeling can give you, or authenticity, beyond simply helping you know how you feel about something and sort out what is a higher ethic for you, is also this concept of emotional Aikido. There is an amazing ability that people who use authenticity have to get other people to feel a certain emotion. They do it either through persuasion or they do it through almost being like an energetic tuning fork. I've been around some feeler perceivers, some FPs, that just when I get around them, I'm feeling the emotion they're feeling, which is usually like a sense of calm. Or there's just this sort of delicious feeling that they're just emanating outward. And whenever I get around them, I'm like, oh, that's a nice one. I want to feel that emotion. And so they persuade me almost like wordlessly, just through emotion. On the other side, if somebody who's using authenticity is feeling quite anxious or stressed out, they can also emit that emotion. And so as opposed to extroverted feeling or harmony, which is absorbing those emotions, introverted feeling or authenticity can be projecting those emotions outward and then getting other people to feel them, whether or not the person who's using authenticity recognizes that they're doing this. But usually, especially you EFPs, you know what you're doing and you know you have the ability to do this. You might think of it as a way to like talk anybody into anything. Weirdly enough, it's not the words you're using. It's the emotion. It's the emotional, energetic connection. It's like you're persuading through your energy even more than you're persuading through your words. So this is a very powerful gift that authenticity will give people who use it and really develop it. And it needs to be used for good because it can appear, and I think this is one of the challenges that some people have with it, even if you are an EFP and using it yourself, is it feels manipulative. It feels like you're able to manipulate other people. Well, the truth is that we're kind of manipulating each other all the time. It's just what tool we're using to manipulate. And if you have an ability to truly develop the emotional Aikido bit, you can actually help other people who are feeling very difficult emotions that they can't seem to find a way out of, almost like stuck in an emotional labyrinth. You can help guide them to a place where they can purge through some of these emotions, get through them, sort of, like not just be stuck in them, but actually get to the other side and feel an emotion that is much more healthy for them to feel. This is why people who use this function oftentimes go into art, because they are communicating an emotion to somebody else through their artwork. It's different forms of expression, wordless expression especially. And then they'll be counselors and therapists because they'll help people get to the emotional experience that they want to get to. And so this is a very powerful element of this function, but it needs to be used for good because, as Joel was mentioning, if you go to that 10-year-old of effectiveness first and then use the Copilot in service of it, what will end up happening is you will be manipulative. You'll be trying to get an end game done. You'll be trying to figure out how to move the needle on a project or get what you want somehow. And then you will use this to manipulate people into giving you what you want, or to rationalize your own sense of ethics and conscience in order to suit the plan or suit the thing you are trying to, make happen. Which that's the opposite direction you want to go. If you truly develop the Copilot, the 10-year-old should be in service to it. So what should be happening is the Copilot will help you figure out how to emotionally Aikido yourself. As Joel mentioned, there's this sense of intimacy with oneself. And so when you get inside there and figure out how you really feel about something, and then now you form passion around a project, or you feel conviction around the right thing to do, then effectiveness becomes the tool you use to make it happen in the outside world. So it's important to get the relationship between these two functions mastered.
So I'll talk about introverted feeling in the nature that you are not going to ever, as you develop this process, quiet the dissenting voices within yourself that have differences of opinion and different viewpoints. The conflict that you're working through may not be resolution. It might be pulling along the dissenting voices to the higher ethic or the deeper ethic. Let's call it the deeper ethic. So for example, you might be going through the world developing, trying to develop this introverted feeling process. And one thing that it does is it puts your ego on the line, because this is the process, in our opinion, that's so tied to identity in a lot of ways, that when you have to make changes or decisions or mold or shape this, it feels like you are having to be molded and shaped, like the core ego or identity of yourself. You're having to actually shift parts of yourself. If you have to pull a part out that doesn't feel as authentic to you, it's almost like you're pulling a part of your identity out. You're letting that part of you go. And the biggest challenge in introverted feeling, from my experience and from the times that we've coached people and seeing them develop this as a co-pilot, the work is not, you're not going to come up with one single voice that says this is the right course of action because there's no other possible dissenting voices. You're going to still have those dissenting voices there. And in fact, if someone else can point to one of those dissenting voices, let's say you want to lose weight and you feel like it's in alignment for you to want to lose weight for your health. Well, you have a voice, a deep ethic to say, to be healthy, I want to lose weight. And yet there's another part of you that you recognize, introverted feeling, that says one of the reasons you want to lose weight is maybe a little bit more surface reason. Maybe it's a little bit more for wanting to look good. It's a little bit more of like a shallower reason. And as introverted feeling, it could be easy for us to try to say, well, I want to marginalize that. I want to do it for the deeper ethic, right? I don't want to honor that lower or that maybe less deep ethic. Again, this is personal to you. I'm just pulling this out of my head right now as an example. And to say, well, part of it's a little bit vain. Yeah, okay. And you play with that and you can accept that about yourself. But now what happens if you're challenged by somebody that comes and says, well, you're doing this because you're vain. You just want to look good for other people. You're losing weight, not for health, but you're doing it because you're a vain person. Part of you knows there's part of you inside there that is a vain person. And you can maybe get tripped up and say, well, I want to prove to this person that just accused me of that, or the outside world give me that feedback that I'm not a vain person. So I'm going to push away the action that I was thinking was right for me just to prove that that's not part of my personality. That's not who I am, being a vain person. And the work, I believe, of FI, of introverted feeling or authenticity, is to say, you know what, there is a part of me that's doing it for vain reasons. And that's actually not the deepest ethic of why I'm doing this. That person's not wrong, but I'm not going to let it hijack my actions. I'm not going to let myself be in reaction to that person. There's a deeper ethic here. Yeah, there's part of me that's maybe vain around this, and there's probably a bunch of other things too, right? But the deeper ethic is I genuinely want to be healthier. And for introverted feeling to get a sense of exactly what's going on for you internally and what your core motivations are, this can be the work of a lifetime. And you're going to get better at it over time as you get more experienced in this to know what the deeper ethic is. And it's going to just have to let those dissenting voices come along the ride and not let them hijack the process and be in reaction to them, especially if other people can hack into those and point to your deficiencies, quote unquote deficiencies. I don't think that's deficient, but point to those and make you feel like it's a bad or wrong motivation. So it's really getting your motivations in some clarity and realizing the deeper ethic is the reason you're doing something. And the dissenters have those viewpoints, but don't let that hijack you.
I think that it's tough when you're developing an introverted judging function to not, like, as you're flaying out all of these contradictions within and trying to figure out who you are, it's difficult to not get your ego all wrapped up in it as well. And we all want to see the best parts of ourselves. And so one of the challenges you might face using introverted feeling or authenticity is you might want to only look at the stuff that's flattering, like only the parts of you that feel good, right? And that's one of the ways you can amalgamate whether or not you're really developing this function or not. Is, are you using this function only to feel good, or are you using it to make sure that you feel aligned, or you feel like you're in the right, not in the right, but you're doing the right thing for you? So that's the struggle. Just like with somebody who's developing extroverted feeling, the struggle is, I gotta go be in conflict, because conflict is inevitable and it's gonna feel really bad and it's gonna be awful and I'm gonna want to hide in in my bed and pull the covers over my head, but that's what I got to do. I got to sit with that awfulness and work through it. And then I get really good at that. I get really good at accepting conflict and then accepting that it's inevitable and then working through it. And then now I feel good that I've developed true harmony. On the flip side, with introverted feeling, you're going to have to sit with some really icky parts of who you are, because all of us have icky parts inside of us. All of us have a dark place. And just wanting to see the good stuff, or possibly being programmed to only look at the bad stuff. That happens too. We get inculcated or propagandized to only see what's wrong with us. And so when we go in internally, it's all we can see is the dark part of who we are. And then being willing to accept the light parts too, the good things about you, all the things that make you a really amazing person. Sometimes that can be the thing we avoid or resist. So being willing to engage the entire inner council, being able to see the dark parts and the light parts, and sitting with all of it, not just doing the thing that you have been habituated to do, or the parts of you that you've been habituated to look at, but really being willing to sit with everything. And that's where you find that in that gestalt is where you find your true self.
Sitting with the internal criticisms and being able to take that. Some of the best growth periods of time for introverted feeling can be when someone's in your face telling you a hard truth and not resisting it, taking it in and sorting it out and figuring out how you feel about it after that experience. There's a lot of learning there. Whether you agree with the person or not, giving you the feedback, it's a great learning experience for you to calibrate that introverted feeling process, because all those feelings inside of you have to be, all that nuance has to be organized and understood. And again, the core here is you're looking for the deeper ethic. You're looking for the deeper resonance. And some of the voices inside of you are not going to be in alignment with that. And it's going ahead and aligning things with that deeper ethic anyway. It's getting all of them in chorus with it, even if they dissent, and not letting those dissents hijack you. So let's talk about some exercises. This is a little more challenging because it's an introverted function, but let's talk about what you can actually do in your life to start developing this process. One strategy.
Well, I thought you should share the exercise since you're an ENFP.
Okay.
Okay.
So again, looking for that deeper ethic, that deeper core, one thing that I'd recommend that we do is, if you're developing introverted feeling or authenticity, when you have motivations come up for you. So you have something that you've decided you want to do or you'd like to do, get out a journal and write down all the reasons you're motivated to do that, and be very honest with yourself. This is the key. You cannot be honest outwardly until you're honest inwardly. Be honest with all the core motivations. So for example, again, you want to maybe do an exercise regime or lose weight. Maybe one of the reasons or motivations is vanity. You want to look good. One of the reasons is you want to get your ex back. You want to look good because you get your ex back. That's another nuance of motivation. Maybe it's to make someone jealous. Maybe it's to actually be healthy. Maybe it's to live longer and have more energy to put into your business or your life. Like, you start to list out all of these motivations, and you're going to see some of the ones that are, more embarrassing to you. The vanity one, or the making your ex jealous, it's the quote unquote one we shouldn't have, but it is a true motivation for you. So getting really clear on the motivations that you have is really important. Bullet list those out, make a list of those, write them down in whatever fashion, and then start to sit with these motivations. Start to ask yourself questions about, okay, well, what does that mean about me as a person? Because all of these things motivate us, right? It's not just one thing motivating you to maybe get into shape. You have all these motivations, and then you can ask yourself, which ones would somebody that put this on me, if somebody tapped into this, which ones would trigger me and cause me not to make this action based on them? Aha, you're doing this to make your ex jealous. I see, blah, 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 blah. And that would maybe hijack your process of doing this. Would you still take that action if that's the view people had about you doing this thing? If everybody in the world thought that your motivation was because of this other reason, that is a real reason for you, you just listed it out. But if everybody thought 100% that was the reason, how would that affect you? How would that make you change maybe your decision around that? And sitting with, what is the deeper ethic out of this entire list? What's the real reason? No matter what anybody on the outside says, no matter what even my inner voices are saying, what is the deeper ethic, the deeper reason why I'm doing this, that these other reasons need to just get in line with? Because that's the reason why. And I don't care if the whole world tells me that it's because I'm vain or I want to get my ex back or whatever. I know, again, this is just an example I'm pulling out the top of my head. I know, At the core of my being, it is resonant for me. It is the right thing for me to do to get into shape and to exercise in this fashion, because that's the deepest ethic. And yeah, some of this other stuff is going to be a byproduct, but that's the deepest ethic. And getting down to the deepest core motivations you have and understanding that, not only are you going to be able to tap into your own motivations, after you get skill built around this, you're going to almost be able to read other people's motivations at will, which is kind of a weird superpower. As you develop this, you're going to be able to see other people and go, wow, I think this is what's motivating them. These 3 or 4 things. There's not just one thing, because I know in me, there's not just one thing motivating me. Everybody has multiple motivations. It's a gestalt of motivation that they have. And that is incredible power to realize. That increases your empathy toward other people, because you realize it's not just one single driving force that's moving them through the world. It's a bunch of things. It has compassion for other people. You're able to see other people's experience in much more fidelity and nuance. This exercise not only helps you internally know the right decisions, but it increases your capacity for compassion and empathy for others in your life. So I can't stress it enough to get into that motivational level for your introverted feeling or authenticity.
Yeah, you've gotten really good at that, by the way. Like reading other people's motivations. It's it's like a weird, crazy superpower of yours. I'm always asking you what people's motivations are. And actually, you've gotten into mine a lot. We just recently had a conversation where I was like, I don't know what's going on for me. And you're like, oh, it's this and this and this. And I'm like, yeah, it is that and that and that. So it works. I watch somebody do it every day. So when we look at these 2 exercises, the introverts are going to like the introverted exercises or exercise. Like you IFJs are going to be really attracted to this concept of getting inside your deeper motivations and journaling about it. And the extroverted motivation is going to be more attractive to the extroverts. You ESPs are like, oh yeah, or EFPs rather are going to be like, yeah, let's go state our preference. That sounds good. Let's go state our preference in the world and engage. But that's the point. The point is that you got to get into the attitude that isn't native to your driver function, because that's the blind spot, or not the blind spot rather, but that's the part of the map that isn't as fleshed out. And if you can really get into developing your Copilot process, it's going to give you a lot of rewards. It's going to make you, if you're an IFJ, it's going to make you so much more tapped into other people's needs and what's really going on for them. And also, even more importantly, it's going to make you have fulfilling relationships and make you less afraid of other people and afraid of vulnerability. You'll enter the world with so much more self-confidence, so much more knowingness, so much more like insight into what's really happening in the world, and persuasion and getting other people to think really high level of thoughts. It's gonna make you a more not just a empathetic person, but it's gonna make you a person who has real power along with your empathy. And then for those of you who are developing introverted feeling or authenticity, the EFPs are going to get to a place where you're not so much reactionary to the world, that you actually maybe have a voice. You have something you want to say. You have expression. You have art. You have persuasion. You have the ability to get things done, not just to get them done, but because you know that that's what you want to have done. And you can tap into other people's motivation. So it's really important to develop the Copilot process for your personality type. The rewards are great. And as we've been mentioning, sometimes they come with some life-changing realizations. If you haven't been developing the Copilot, you might find yourself realizing that you have constructed a world that is not tailored to you. Personality types and understanding them, it helps us create an ergonomic environment for who we are. And if we've been avoiding our Copilot, which is a major part of how we're wired, then our environment might not be ergonomic for us at all. And once we get into this development, we realize there are some serious changes we need to make in life, which is one of the reasons why we put off development of this function, is because we know or we suspect, or maybe we just fear that changes are on the horizon if we really do this well. And that's its power. I think of Brian Regan, when the comedian Brian Regan talked about going and getting glasses, and he said that he had been putting it off for a really long time, and then he went and got glasses, and he's like, how is instantly improved vision not at the top of my list, right? And I think about that with our life. Like sometimes we put these changes off because we fear the work that they represent and all the different uncomfortable conversations we're going to have, and maybe the time and resource that's going to have to go into making a different life. But how is an ergonomically designed life to your personality type not at the top of your list? Those things are things we should probably be doing anyway. And so then we live a life that is fulfilling for us, that we feel good around, and we're not slowly dying a death of 1,000 cuts.
Okay, so now it's your turn. We just did our job. We showed up and talked for a while. But you need to come and share your story, share your experience. Maybe you are working on your Copilot. You're an IFJ or an EFP. You've put some time into this, and you have some insights. You've got some great tips that you can share with the community. You can share with us. This is a co-creative experience. You don't have a microphone, but you can come over to personalityhacker.com and leave your story, leave your experience, ask a question, leave a comment directly below this podcast. We need your voice represented. And maybe you're just starting out on your journey. You've got some questions. Maybe you've mastered your Copilot. Maybe you're an EFP and and I could learn from you. And you've gotten to like extreme levels of mastery that I can learn from even personally. I'm excited to see what people write in about authenticity and how you've developed it. Or you're an IFJ and you've developed that harmony process to a degree where you've created harmony in your world and people feel great around you and real resolutions are happening. You're working through conflict between people. Your voice matters. Come over to personalityhacker.com. Leave a comment, ask a question directly below this podcast. You can also find us on a varied amount of social media platforms. I won't run through the whole list right now, but if you just search our username, Personality Hacker or Personality Hack, typically we're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, a bunch of different platforms, YouTube, whatever. We've got a bunch of different channels set up for you to engage with a community of like minds, people that think just like you, and we can each challenge each other and grow together.
And of course, if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you're wondering how to support Personality Hacker and our mission to help people become the best versions of themselves, one of the best ways that you can do that is to go to our website, personalityhacker.com, and check out our product catalog. There are plenty of premium programs in there for personal development. One of them might be a right fit for you. It might be something that helps you move the needle in your life. And if you see something that you think might be right for you, investing in yourself in one of those programs is one of the best ways to help us out as well.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.